Dr. Phil has been unleashed.
Welcome to my channel, Outspoken Samantha. If you are new here, welcome. I would really appreciate your help in growing this channel, and I invite you to subscribe. And if you are returning, I truly appreciate your continued support on my channel, and it would help me out a lot if you would make sure that you are subscribed as well. Dr. Phil has been particularly vocal about is this gender craze that has gotten so out of control. And I mean, honestly, was it ever in control? Because these ideas are completely insane and predatory and devastating. But he did sit down with Joe Rogan to discuss the reality of what is happening. The clip that is going around is about 9 minutes long. And if you want to see the whole thing, I do highly recommend it. And I'll link it in the description box. But I pulled just a couple of important points that he talks about because he addresses some of the most common arguments that we hear that, that people use to convince themselves that allowing children to mutilate their bodies is safe, life-saving, and or necessary for them to be their true selves.
It's interesting they choose words like gender-affirming care. That's interesting that they call it that, but really what they're talking about is hormonal therapy or sex reassignment surgery.
Sorry, I just had to stop it right there real quick because I love how he emphasized the word call it that, meaning he knows that the labels that these people use are entirely and intentionally misleading because it doesn't accurately describe what it is that these kids are going to be dealing with and what these surgeries and treatments actually look like, but it takes something horrific and it makes it sound nice and fluffy.
On children. And in fairness, the American Medical Association, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Endocrine Society, or whatever the exact name of that is, all of the major medical associations have signed off on this, Joe. They've signed off on it. And I have never seen those organizations sign off on anything with less information as to whether or not it does long-term harm of anything in my life. And when I ask about that, when I bring that up, then they immediately label you as transphobic.
Welcome to being a conservative. Using the word transphobic is just another huge red flag when it comes to this issue, because you can't talk about the lack of long-term information and studies that say that this stuff is not actually helping people's lives or improving their mental health or reducing suicidality rates or anything like that. And you can't bring it up without being called names. And that is just absolutely bonkers and just shows how truly insane this whole thing is. But there's a reason that we have clinical trials and studies of things to make sure that what we're prescribing is actually safe and beneficial. But this is one area where for some reason we can't seem to do that because they mainstreamed this treatment, making every single one of these patients the actual study. And then they'll compile the data in 20 years when we have thousands of young people whose bodies were unnecessarily mutilated and sterilized.
And I thought that the deal was first do no harm. And all of the European countries, Sweden, Norway, they've all stopped doing it because they say, we cannot say in good conscience that this does no harm.
And just real quick, yes, there have been so many studies done in European countries, and the data that they are finding actually cause them to put an immediate stop to these operations, stop to this ideology, majorly scaling it back, shut down, turn off the lights, everybody go home and find a new job. So if the information that they're gathering didn't just tell them to slow down, but to quit doing this pretty much altogether, that and the fact that the US is actually ignoring those studies tells us how truly evil and ludicrous this whole thing is.
And they're telling me that they have a duty to the children, that if the child is not ready to talk to their parents about this, that it's okay for them to keep a secret from the child. Now, first off, if this is either a psychological phenomenon or a medical phenomenon, and the teachers are not trained in either psychology or medicine, they're not any more trained to deal with that than they are to take out the kid's spleen in the homeroom. Secondly, it's teaching the child to keep a secret from their parents. It's teaching deception and interfering between the child's relationship with their parent. Now, their issue, their justification for that is, well, if the child goes home and announces this, or if we tell it to the parent, then the child could get abused, the child could get judged, the child could get kicked to the curb. But they have to admit, statistically, that that is very rare. And if that's the case, that's what we have Department of Child and Family Services for. That's what we have Child Protective Services for. If that's the case, then you call in for some intervention if the child is being abused at home for whatever reason.
Thank you. So the argument is that the kid may not feel ready to tell the parents, or that it's an uncomfortable subject, so they don't want to bring it up, or whatever the situation is. And that argument just blows my mind, because you know what else my child is really uncomfortable telling me about? If they get in trouble at school, or if they get a bad grade on an assignment or in a class. And it's not because they think that I'm going to beat them, it's just they have made a poor decision, and that's always a difficult thing to bring to the attention of their parent. Yet somehow, I get a phone call the same day from their teacher or the school counselor or the principal, or sometimes all three, if something happens. Because in those scenarios, the teachers seem to recognize that the parents need that information in order to help address the problem. They recognize that the parent actually loves their child and doesn't want them to get in trouble at school, doesn't want them to fail their grades, doesn't want to do poorly on their homework or have a rough time at school in any way. And they recognize that if a child gets into an altercation or something happens, that it is crucial to tell the parent so that they can help correct the problem, address it at home with their kid, and figure out how to make the situation better and hopefully to avoid it in the future. Because they know that that parent is going to get their child the help that they need, whether it be medical assistance, whether it be mental health assistance, whether it be a tutor, whether it be extra time on a particular subject, or if it's just that parent having a discussion with them about what lessons can be learned from this situation and how to have a better approach to it in the future. Whatever the situation is, parents want the best for their kids regardless of what it is, and it is a completely false narrative that this is the one issue that they can't bring up to their parents. For one thing, the teacher is not the parent and cannot be the parent. They have dozens and sometimes hundreds of students, depending on the school and the grade level, and it is impossible for them to parent every single child, and they know it is not their job. And any teacher who says otherwise is lying and should be fired, because that's not a teacher, that is a predator. I mean, can you imagine if a child got a bad grade on something and the teacher says, you can't tell your parents, they'll be angry, they're not going to love you anymore, they're not going to understand. Is that child going to improve their grades with that approach? Is that child likely to get the help that they need to improve the situation? No, and that would be insane. So to say that any of this is to actually help the child makes absolutely no sense. And again, it's because it is total and utter crap. Because they want every kid to be taught this destructive ideology without their parents getting in the way, so that they can create a future society of crippled, incapable, mentally ill individuals who cannot contribute anything productive to society or have healthy families or raise strong kids of their own. So I would love to hear all the thoughts in the comments below, but if you could hit that like button and make sure that you are subscribed, those are two very simple things that you can do that really help me out. I appreciate you all so much. Keep it real, guys, and I will see you in the next one.